Roger Williams University is hosting a crisis management seminar on May 3rd at their Providence campus. Crises, whether a natural disaster, cyber attack, or financial instability, can have severe repercussions if not handled properly. This is where crisis management plays a pivotal role. Join Roger Williams MBA students and expert speakers to learn how to prepare for the unexpected. The program is totally free and open to the public. You can register online at rwu.edu/events/crisis-management-symposium. Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to the Bartholomew Town WPRO debate series. I'm Bill Bartholomew. Today we present a debate in the Democratic primary for General Treasurer, featuring former Rhode Island Commerce Secretary Stefan Pryor. His opponent, former Central Falls Mayor James Diossa, has declined our invitation to debate in spite of several efforts to secure his participation. We've left an empty chair with a handwritten sign with Diossa's name on it and an empty microphone available for him should he and his advisors have a last-second change of heart. As Mr. Pryor is aware, today's debate is scheduled to last no more than 1 hour. Other than those parameters, there really are no strict rules for the format of today's forum. We'll begin with introductions. Given that Mr. Diossa has chosen to not appear today, we will, of course, have Mr. Pryor offer an introduction and why you're running for treasurer.
Very glad to be with you, Bill. Thanks for hosting this. I, for one, appreciate this forum, and I cannot understand why my opponent wouldn't want to get out there his priorities and his ideas for the office. I think this is a terrific venue for that. And Bill, it's great to be back with you. And what I want to share with your listeners is that I believe the Treasurer's Office can be a propellant for the economy, that it can move the economy forward, and that by managing the finances well, the state's finances well, and by utilizing the platform of the Treasurer's Office, we can keep our economy strong and even grow our economy. So what do I mean by that? I mean that the Treasurer's Office thankfully includes personnel who are skilled in finance, and under recent treasurers, we've seen more stability in the pension fund that the Treasurer's Office does manage. And I think what we can do is we can build upon that legacy and build upon that momentum and do more for the economy. And what I mean by that is small businesses often struggle to get access to capital. They need to obtain loans and even grants if possible. During the pandemic, the state did stand up, and I had a big role in this, new financing programs for small businesses to help them get through. Those were, stores and shops that we all love, restaurants we all enjoy. We needed to help them get through so they could cover their fixed costs. But it shouldn't take a pandemic for the state to have a long-term commitment to small businesses. And I'd like to make the Treasurer's Office the permanent home of small business financing, working in concert with other offices. I'd also like to ensure that we have a vision for the economy, working with the governor, whoever he or she may be, working with the governor, working with other elected officials, the Senate president, the speaker, and many others. I think we need a vision for the economy. Which sectors are going to propel the economy, what's going to keep us moving. And some obvious choices include the blue economy, meaning all things ocean, and we can get into that if you're interested, and also manufacturing. I just this morning was privileged to join the Rhode Island Manufacturers Association and receive their endorsement. And I'm so glad that the manufacturers of this state have faith in me. I have faith in them. We managed to get through the whole pandemic, Bill, without shutting down the sector. Now, did we work cooperatively with industry and labor to spread workstations, to aerate spaces, to ensure that personnel wore masks? Yes, we did. But it was all cooperative, and we kept that sector open. And today, manufacturing as a sector has more jobs than pre-pandemic. So what I'm expressing here in my opening is that I believe the Treasurer's Office can be used as a catalyst for the economy, can keep our economy going. And we may be seeing challenging times ahead, Bill. We're certainly seeing some of the flashing lights that would be indicators of a recession. It's good to see that inflation is cooling off a little bit, but it's still very high. And the stock market is still volatile. It's far from its peak, and it's volatile. So we need to mind the finances carefully, professionally, And I believe that I can do that. I can get into my qualifications more, but I want to start with the message about the economy.
All right, well, thank you for that opening. And let's begin with what is considered to be, in many ways, the key function of the Office of the General Treasurer, and that is managing the state's pension fund. You kind of offered this in your opening remarks, but as a general overview, how would you describe the health and performance of Rhode Island's pension fund over the past decade, and what key changes would you implement if elected treasurer?
The health of the pension fund is far better than it was a decade ago. So to answer that question directly and precisely, it's doing better, but it has a ways to go. So right now, the funded level, the coverage of the pension obligations is at about 58%. Where you want to be in a truly healthy system is 80%. So we have a distance to travel, but it's up substantially from where it was a decade ago. And what I'd like to see us do is gain health sufficiently that we can actually begin to restore benefits to beneficiaries, restore benefits to our valued public servants, our teachers, our firefighters, our police officers, our state workers. They deserve a retirement that they can rely upon with decent adjustments depending upon the economy. We can't until we have an even healthier fund. I will say this also. In recent years, the fund has been meeting its growth targets. We have set that target at 7%. We've been exceeding that. Now, with the stock market volatility recently, we are likely to see, and in fact, early reports show that we are seeing a decrease. We've actually lost value in the pension fund. Now, I'm not there managing it yet, and I don't have the insight on all of the facts and figures, but we've actually lost potentially $1 billion of value out of what was a $10.8 billion fund. We might be down close to $1 billion. So the point is that we're headed into choppy waters. The economy is uncertain. It is, in fact, such a variable that we need someone in charge of the pension fund, of the state's finances, and of our efforts around the economy, someone who has managed billions of dollars, someone who has managed through crises such as the pandemic, and I had the opportunity to do that and the challenge of doing that under two governors, Governor Raimondo and Governor McKee. Also on the billions of dollars of management front, I want to add, I mentioned that I would get into my qualifications. I was called into service after September 11th, 2001 to serve in the new rebuilding agency that was set up in order to coordinate the revitalization of Lower Manhattan and the reconstruction of the World Trade Center, including the establishment of a fitting memorial. And I became the president of that agency. It's the Lower Manhattan Development Corporation. And I proudly served there. It was extraordinarily challenging, but we managed billions of dollars of investment to a very good effect. I'm sure many of your listeners have visited the new memorial there. Not so new anymore, but the memorial there. It's beautiful and moving, and has, from the victims' families' perspective in general, been a place where tribute can be paid appropriately. And also it has served as a center point in Lower Manhattan for gatherings, both for tributes and for tourists who want to understand what happened on September 11th in the museum that's been established there. And the office towers have been rebuilt, the Twin Tower office space rebuilt by a crescent of towers of different sizes. And all this to say, we needed to coordinate billions of dollars of investment, public funding and private funding, and the job got done. Here in Rhode Island, I had the opportunity under two governors to manage billions of dollars of investment, private and public, to get development done in our state, to get new manufacturing plants built, to get new hotels built, and some of those through the pandemic. I mentioned that we didn't shut manufacturing down during the pandemic. We didn't shut construction sites down either, with the same methods. Very close cooperation with industry and labor, and attention to the public health. We didn't disregard the public health. We kept them open, and construction, too, is at an employment level that is greater than the pre-pandemic levels. So I am blessed with experience that I would like to put to further use in Rhode Island, managing billions of dollars and keeping the economy strong. And, Bill, that's what I'd like to do.
And we'd certainly like to hear your opponent, Mr. Diossa's experience as well. Of course, he declined our invitation to be here for today's debate. Drawing off of the answer right there, COLAs, cost of living adjustments, which were frozen during pension reform here under then Treasurer Gina Raimondo, they're scheduled to resume once the state's pension fund reaches that 80% threshold. As treasurer, do you see a way that through either an arbitrary or calculated percentage that is less than 80, that those COLAs could be restored? And in general, what's your message to the retirees in the state of Rhode Island, the thousands that are awaiting those benefits that you described? If you were treasurer, will they get those benefits before the end of your term?
My message is I'm certainly the candidate best positioned to restore benefits because of my experience managing billions of dollars, and quite frankly also because I'm the child of two public school teachers, and I know the value of my father's pension. May both of my parents rest in peace, but I know the value of, first of all, public service. Thanks to both of my parents, they showed me every day what it meant, and second, because of my father's pension, I know how valuable it is to a family that doesn't have trust funds to rely upon, doesn't have a lot of wealth to draw upon. I understand it personally, so I will passionately and professionally seek restoration of benefits. As to precisely when COLAs can be restored, I need to get in there. Please, voters of Rhode Island, help me get in as treasurer. I will analyze the data up and down, back and forth, and determine how we can accelerate the restoration of benefits. Now, at first, if we're in a recession, we may be protecting the fund as it stands. That may be the task because we're already seeing loss in value. So we need to protect the administration of benefits at the levels that they're already at. But we need to get past any downturn that does arrive. And my goal will be to look at every subcomponent of the pension fund, Bill, every fund manager, every investment that we have historically made and that we continue to make. I've already started. I've been sitting down and analyzing what's available in the public materials, and I'll thank Treasurer Magaziner. He's also offered access to his staff. He would do that for any candidate. I know he would, but he offered access just to start to ask questions. Mm-hmm. I'm going to look at every slice, every component, every strand of the pension fund. Those that are underperforming, benchmarked against other states' pension funds, benchmarked against endowments and other major actors in the investment field. If they're underperforming, I'm going to ask a lot of questions, and we may replace that fund manager. It's straightforward, but I think it's a healthy thing to do every time there's a new treasurer, and I'm going to be aggressive about it. That's one of the secrets to growing the fund at an accelerated pace and restoring benefits, and that will be a goal of mine. Currently, you mentioned accurately that there's an 80% coverage threshold where benefits start to be restored. It's estimated currently that we will reach that in 2031, so it's almost a decade out. I would very much like to see that date moved up.
Sticking with the pension, what's your stand on keeping, this is a very layman's way of describing this, but keeping Rhode Island's dollars at home? In other words, would you prioritize or find space to invest pension funds in Rhode Island institutions?
The short answer is yes, but the longer answer is this. I think it's very important that we prioritize regarding our investments very carefully, very responsibly. The chief goal needs to be to grow the value of that pension fund for the benefit of retirees, also for the benefit of all Rhode Island taxpayers, because we never want to bail the pension fund out. And if we bail the pension fund out, it hurts health and human services, educational services, public safety services for Rhode Islanders. So it's very important that we focus on the growth of that fund and the return upon the investments that are part of the system. Now, having said that, I would look to invest in sectors where there's the right combination of factors, including benefits to Rhode Island companies and Rhode Island workforce. growing Rhode Island jobs. And what do I mean by that? The best example, Bill, may be the clean energy sector. So Rhode Island has been a pioneer in offshore wind. We are still the first, will always be the first, and the only state with turbines in the water off of Block Island. We have a 5-turbine array that is actually pouring power, clean energy into our grid. We have a procurement process that's very far along, moving towards a deployment of 50 turbines for 400 megawatts, and the General Assembly just authorized 1,000 megawatts more. When all of that happens in the offshore wind field, we will be able to power more than half of our grid, more than half of Rhode Island, with clean energy. I mean, this is a significant scale. And by the way, that means that the prices are competitive, and it makes sense from just a taxpayer perspective, ratepayer perspective, to be doing clean energy. Now, I'd give that long intro to say that it would make enormous sense for Rhode Island's pension fund to invest in clean energy, inclusive of offshore wind, because it will benefit Rhode Island. That investment should be across the country and world to strengthen the health of the industry, and some of those benefits will come back to Rhode Island, but it should be the kind of calculation I'm describing, which is that we will see benefit back. Also, I think Rhode Islanders want to see us combat climate change, want to see us prevent global warming. This is a move that will do that, so it fulfills our public policy mandate. And, Bill, even fossil fuel companies are trying to go in the direction of hybrid sources of energy. So the future that you should bet on if you're an investor is clean and green. So when all these things combine, it's a smart investment. It's going to benefit public policy purposes that Rhode Islanders believe in, clean energy and mitigating climate change. And to your point, it would benefit Rhode Island industry. That's the kind of move we should make. So you can hear that I'll go through an analytical process the way Rhode Islanders would want a treasurer to do. Don't do anything fast and loose with our money. I hear that loud and clear. I would never do that. We protect the taxpayers, protect the ratepayers, and make moves that will benefit Rhode Island in that smart way.
Treasurer Magaziner engaged in what I would call activist divestment. Divesting pension funds from weapon manufacturers comes to mind as one specific example. Would you maintain this specific strategy? And are there areas of divestment or investment even that you would seek to engage in from what I guess we could describe as a social justice or otherwise activist type of standpoint?
You framed that question well, Bill, and it very much is aligned with my mindset. There are multiple moves a treasurer can make to express a point of view about corporate responsibility and corporate behavior, and to express a point of view about an issue that Rhode Islanders care about. But there are several ways a treasurer can do it. There's divestment, there's investment, there's voice, and there's vote. So let me just talk about those four things. You touched upon them already, so it's easy to do. So divestment is pulling out altogether from a company, all the investment out as a major move. Investment obviously means proactively, affirmatively contributing dollars to a sector or to a company for that matter. Voice and vote mean as a shareholder with a seat at the table, voicing an opinion on how a company should be advancing itself, should be addressing an issue, should be conducting itself. And vote means to say that sometimes there's shareholder voting on issues of import within a company and participating in that process. Even in league with other treasurers in the country, you could call for a vote or trigger a vote under the right circumstances. So that set of moves is what I would utilize, thinking very carefully and responsibly about, first and foremost, the return of dollars to the fund for the sake of our retirees and all Rhode Island taxpayers, never to harm our standing. But there are issues that Rhode Islanders are going to care about, and I'll say this, working carefully and responsibly, we may want to select certain additional moves building upon the legacy of Treasurer Magaziner. I'm going to stick with clean energy and talk about it for a moment. I have not made this decision, but it is the case that there's very limited power generation activity involving coal and the coal industry in Rhode Island. It's not a major part of our economy. However, we are pioneers in offshore wind. I've gotten into that plenty, and we've explored that already. So I would consider, illustratively, I have not made this decision. I'd have to look at the investment portfolio and analyze it very carefully, professionally, responsibly. It might be the case that we aim to avoid investments involving coal as the generator of energy. It's no longer necessary in the Rhode Island economy, to be sure, but in the American economy, and it's a dirty source of energy. So could we emphasize at a minimum and even exclusively focus on other sources of energy? That would be an incremental step. That doesn't mean that we're out of fossil fuels altogether. That's not what I'm saying. Not saying we would divest altogether, because, frankly, one of the things that we might want to do is there could come a day where we shift altogether from fossil fuel investments. Absolutely could come a day. But for now, I think we want to use divestment, investment, voice, and vote to put pressure on companies that have multiple holdings and force fuel and energy companies in the direction of clean energy and a greener future. So you can get a sense for how I would conduct this work. Again, I want to emphasize, you can't lose sight of the returns on the investment for our pensioners, so you can't make radical moves that will really disrupt the financial stability of the fund, but you can make surgical moves upon studying them very carefully.
Yeah, and as I recall, that divestment from, I believe it was assault weapons manufacturers, was a microscopic portion of the overall pension fund.
And that's the kind of move I'd look to make, too. So if we discovered that coal was itself also microscopic, there you go.
Again, we're here with former Commerce Secretary Stefan Pryor, former Central Falls Mayor James Diossa, also in this race. Didn't bother to show up today, so we won't know what his answers are, shockingly, but we'll continue moving on here. Tidewater Landing is a project that would see the development of a soccer stadium in Pawtucket, along with scheduled auxiliary development of housing and other economic drivers. Are you comfortable with the project's current funding formula? There was a recent report from WPRI that candidly suggests that the stadium project will not be able to support itself in its first year. Are taxpayers going to be left holding the bag? Are you comfortable with the notion that soccer is popular enough to drive the human capital, if you will, that will generate this project to a sustainable, at minimum, level?
This is an important point, Bill, and I think we talked about this during our last interview together on the air. That was not a debate at the time, but similarly, we had this conversation. It is definitely the case that the stadium unto itself will not be self-supporting financially. You need the surrounding development with the tax revenue it generates for the total complex to potentially pay for itself. That's always been true in this version of the plan. So I'm glad that WPRI and other analysts are digging in on it. But let's be clear, that's true. A stadium is rarely a self-supporting financial entity. It's not the case that hot dogs and Cracker Jack and soda and beer are going to support and the tax revenue off of those are going to support the development and the public investment. Very, very rare that that's the case. So what you need is surrounding development. And in our case, on both sides of the river, what we're aiming for, what the developer has promised, is new residential development, is new commercial, retail, and office development, and parking structures and infrastructure to support all of the above. We need to see that happen. So you've heard me express this before, Bill, but it's very important to repeat. What's necessary now in the stadium development process is that the public parties hold the private parties accountable, first and foremost, for establishing benchmarks to conducting the future development, residential, commercial, infrastructure. We need to see that happen. There need to be benchmarks. There needs to be accountability for meeting those benchmarks. In other words, accountability for the developers spending against those benchmarks, doing the architectural designs, doing the engineering, doing the cost estimating, drilling into the earth and doing testing on the desired targeted parcels of land. We need to see that happen, and if not, there should be accountability. What does accountability mean? The pledged land, the municipal land, should be pulled back, and frankly, those opportunities should go to other developers. And there should be a sense of competitiveness if this particular set of developers under fortuitous can't get the job done. I'm not saying they won't. I know that they're absolutely determined to do it. I hope they do it, and know that they are focused upon it. And the other component of the whole accountability system needs to be that the stadium needs to get fully built before public funds actually are channeled into that development. We don't want to get left, we the taxpayers of Rhode Island, do not want to get left with a partially built stadium that's not utilizable, that will never generate revenue, and will certainly not catalyze the surrounding area. So the public dollars should flow only after a certificate of occupancy or until the stadium is built. And we also need to make sure that there's a pledge from the professional soccer team that they're going to be in that stadium. An empty stadium does no one any good, even if it's fully built. So we need to see a pledge of 30 years, which is what's been promised, with penalties if that team drops it. But the most important drops its participation in that stadium. But what's most important, Bill, is the point I started with, which is accountability for future development. Only if we have tax-generating future development do we have a shot at the whole complex paying for itself and more.
We've heard Brett Johnson and others offer analysis, and frankly, if it's even anecdotally, I can certainly attest to that soccer is popular here. There's no question about it. We have our own soccer show here on WPRO, and we've had it for years. So are you confident that minor league USL soccer is the type of business model that is best suited for a stadium project in Pawtucket? Some people might say, hey, geez, this seems like a runner-up to the Paw Sox. The minor league baseball had a tradition. You see there are college basketball teams here. If they're doing well, they can generate ticket sales, and there are obviously broadcast revenues associated with that. But minor league soccer, is that a good business from your perspective?
I actually think it's a very good business. I think it's a very good source of energy, and I think it's a very good sport for Rhode Island. And here are the reasons why. First of all, people have different opinions on whether baseball is uptrending or downtrending in America, but the point is that there's a mix of opinions. There are certainly some viewers of the scene who think that baseball is on the decline. Most viewers of the scene think soccer is going in the upward direction, that there are more soccer moms every year, that there are more communities that are bought into and excited about soccer in America. It's going up. And we can ride that popularity in general. But then in particular for Rhode Island, there are some good signs. I don't have the data in front of me, but there are cases where when there's World Cup soccer broadcast on a per capita basis, Rhode Island outstrips our surrounding states and does very well, like top 10 viewership on a concentrated basis in the country. So I know we've done better in multiple instances than Massachusetts, and they've got a professional soccer team up there. So there's good signs that Rhode Islanders are already interested in soccer. The data seems to show it. And again, it's an uptrending sport. I also think that there is residual interest, thankfully, in a professional sports team, and Pawtucket being the center of our professional sports universe in Rhode Island. I think there's just people who want to be at a game. Now, yes, we did love the Paw Sox as a Red Sox affiliate. Of course we did. But also people liked to go to the game. Families like to go to the game to, sit out on the lawn or sit in the bleachers and just enjoy the time with their family, get affordable snacks, and, just enjoy the scene and the little bits of entertainment that happened around the baseball game. So it was partially about the baseball. I mean, baseball's a marvelous sport too, but it was also heavily about the experience. And I think that the Fortuitous group that is bringing us the professional soccer team, they're very focused on that. They're going to make it a great experience. And again, soccer's on the rise.
All right, Mr. Pryor, continuing with you, your opponent, James Diossa, the former mayor of Central Falls, shockingly did not show up today for this debate. As treasurer, you wouldn't have many, if any, explicit policy-making powers, so to speak. But you would have a substantial bully pulpit from which you could advocate for policies, draft legislation, maneuver the state's fiscal apparatus, and other things as well. So what are some of the key ways that you would utilize that bully pulpit?
I'm glad you asked that. A few things. Small business, protecting the vulnerable, safeguarding the economy. So I'm going to talk about those. Small business. I've mentioned this already, but I want to reemphasize it because it's so important. Small businesses, including minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, veteran-owned businesses, often struggle to access capital. Why? Because they don't have pre-existing relationships with banks and other lenders. They're not multi-generational businesses. They're startups. They don't have the networks and the relationships to make those dollars flow. So I'd like to create a permanent home for assistance for small businesses in the Treasurer's office, working in concert with other offices, the Commerce Office of the state, the Secretary of State's office where business registration happens, very closely in concert. And I'd like to offer sources of financing working in partnership with banks and other lenders, credit unions, community lenders. So that's a very important priority. I think given the Treasurer's office and the expertise inherent in it, its staff, its track record, and its relationships with banks, I think we would be well positioned to offer that kind of programming. And again, during the pandemic, I'm proud of the fact that we offered sustained funding, multiple rounds of funding to small businesses to help get them through. There's a reason why we have one of the strongest recoveries in the United States, according to Moody's. Last time I checked, second in the country for the strength of our recovery, first in the entire Northeast region, the strongest recovery in the Northeast region. Now, we did that in part by supporting small businesses through this so that on the other end of the pandemic, they were still alive and that they could still operate. So our favorite shops were there for us to shop in, and our favorite restaurants were there for us to dine in. So I'd like to see that happen. So protecting the vulnerable. I think there are opportunities through the Treasurer's office to help communities that are coming from behind. And I'll offer two examples. One is that middle income and lower income Rhode Islanders sometimes themselves have trouble accessing the banking system. I'm talking about individuals and families. What causes this? Sometimes banks have these required minimum balances where there are significant fines and fees that turn customers off, really intimidate customers who don't have experience with banking, and cause people to keep their dollars under a mattress. And in order to build wealth, it's important to have deposits in interest-bearing accounts and to build a nest egg. So I'd like to work with banks and other lenders to open up banking to more Rhode Islanders, middle-income and lower-income Rhode Islanders, by cooperatively for the entry period, the early customer period for Rhode Islanders, waive some of those fines and fees, or at least significantly lower them, to offer free check cashing services, a certain quantity of them, 3 or 6 free instances to get people weaned off of check cashing establishments where the rates are really very severe and could harm the health of a family, and other such services. Get away from payday lending, utilizing the traditional banking system and credit unions to help families build wealth. Why do I know this can be done? Because I've studied programs in other parts of the country where they have these banking coalitions that they form using the influence, using the persuasive power of government, and cooperatively developing these systems. So we're going to do that in Rhode Island if I'm treasurer. Also on protecting the vulnerable, Bill, I want to talk about a very important issue, which is domestic violence. Too often when an individual is escaping very tough family circumstances, including domestic violence, one of the barriers for a woman departing, for example, such a scenario is joint bank accounts or other entangled finances where it just doesn't seem possible to make a move away from that household, even if there's abuse or violence occurring. We need to find solutions there. as treasurer, I would work with domestic violence advocacy organizations, and we've already started this process with some individuals who are very knowledgeable, and develop bridge tools so that anonymously anyone escaping such circumstances can find a dose of financing to get them into a new place and help them until they establish their own new financial footing. So that's another way we can protect the vulnerable in Rhode Island. So you can see how, as we grow prosperity in our state, we're aiming never to leave anyone behind and to protect our more vulnerable fellow residents. And then I did want to also talk about the fact that finally the Treasurer's Office can be a real advancing force for the economy as a whole. And the way in which I want to express that is the convening power of the state that I referred to earlier. There are sectors that are promising. There are sectors that are strong. The blue economy is a great example. I got into it only partially, but we have the opportunity with offshore wind to make new investments. We also have the opportunity to emphasize that we build half of America's submarine fleet here in Rhode Island, or half of electric boats anyway. We have boat building prowess extraordinaire. We have seafood processing. We have fisheries. In all of these instances, how do we have sufficient financing to keep them going? How do we attract investment? Does this mean that we have to use pension funds for these purposes? It does not. It does not. But it does mean that we can help work in concert with the governor's office, the General Assembly, with private parties, with private investors, to rally resources and make sure that these industries are well funded and are well established and well advancing, so that we can create jobs for Rhode Islanders.
These next few questions, kind of keeping them tight, sort of. I don't know. We don't have to let's come up with a time frame, but here, come up with a time frame for here. But something, just off the top of your head, if you will. All right, you're elected. Day one after you're elected, you wake up the next morning. You're elected in the general. Who are the first 3 phone calls you make?
Good question. Well, I would make calls to now Secretary Gina Raimondo and Treasurer Seth Magaziner, because I'd like to hear from our 2 past treasurers what were some of the pitfalls, what were some of the items that were items left undone, so that we can make sure that we fix any problems that remain. There are in any office, in any operation, there are challenges that remain, frailties that can be identified, moves that can be made that are moving it forward. And I'd also like to hear from them, given the generations of work that have occurred to stabilize the pension fund, to stabilize our finances, what are the things that they viewed as being in their longer-term plans that just couldn't be done on their watch that they'd like to see get implemented? So those would certainly be 2 of the phone calls I'd make. I think I'm sticking in the government domain. This may not be extraordinarily interesting, but I think practically speaking, whoever is our next governor, whether it's the incumbent governor, Dan McKee, or a successor governor, I think to that person as well, because I think the idea would be to start on day one working together, especially given our goals for the economy, to work in concert with whoever the governor may be. You'd want to be in sync as much as humanly possible. One of the things that I, in concluding the last segment of what I expressed, didn't get into is that to propel the economy forward, I'd want to look at tax policy. This is a great example of where it would be in concert with the governor, and for that matter, the Speaker, the Senate President, and other leadership, private sector leaders as well. But right now, with the runaway inflation, even the slightly tamed version is still very significant. You'd want to look at something like the status of the sales tax in Rhode Island. And the reason I bring that up is that Rhode Island's sales tax rate is higher than Connecticut's and Massachusetts' sales tax. We're already less competitive than they when it comes to the cost of products that are sold in our shops. And we're, frankly, driving some of our residents to Connecticut and Massachusetts to get better pricing because the sales tax is lower, quite obviously. But in the context of inflation, it especially makes sense to try to offer some relief at the checkout counter. So I wonder whether we could progress with a policy of at least chipping away at the sales tax. That is a situation where I would want to work very closely with the governor and make sure that he or she had the ability to dialogue with the treasurer about the tax moves that she or he viewed as most favorable, most helpful, what their goals were. I'd take that into account. My voice would only make sense in the context of other such voices. But I do think that the treasurer should have a voice on tax policy and move us in the direction of being ever more competitive as a state, because the goal should be to create an economy that is durably strong for everyday Rhode Islanders, so that everyday Rhode Islanders can purchase goods and services at a reasonable level. It doesn't cut too much into their paycheck, and so that everyday Rhode Islanders can obtain well-paying jobs over the long term.
Looking for a yes or no answer on this one. Are you in favor of raising corporate tax rates?
I am not. Now, you never say never. There are circumstances under which it might make sense to revisit any of these points, but I'll say this. I'm not, because we are in turbulent economic times. During uncertain economic times, you don't want to do anything that could further destabilize the economy. You don't want to hurt businesses so that they have to shed jobs. So it's really the last time, the last thing you want to do is raise taxes on businesses. Again, having said that, you may revisit such a decision at another point in time. What I think we ought to do instead is, if our goal is to achieve fairness for everyday Rhode Islanders, I embrace that goal. That's why I'm in favor of cutting the sales tax. The sales tax is a regressive tax, meaning that lower income and middle income Rhode Islanders have greater impact from a higher sales tax because they can least afford to pay out of their pocket the extra money that goes to the sales tax. So it helps middle income and low income Rhode Islanders more to cut the sales tax than it does to even help wealthier Rhode Islanders. There's another tax that I would look at, too, from the perspective of helping those individuals and businesses that are more struggling and on the tougher end of the economic spectrum, and that's the tangible tax. The tangible property tax is a tax on every small business in the state. No matter how fragile the business is, even if the business is still struggling coming out of COVID, that business has to pay a local tangible property tax on equipment and on furniture, even though they already paid a sales tax on those items. I think that's a tax. It's unevenly administered. It often hits small businesses the worst. And I'd like to take a look at lowering, or even in some cases enabling, localities to eliminate tangible taxes. And the reason I'm making these points, Bill, is that they accompany my yes answer, which is that my no answer on raising corporate taxes, yeah, which is to say we should be aiming for fairness for Rhode Islanders who are lower income and middle income. And there are other ways to get there.
Last couple of minutes here. We are in the midst of our general treasurer, Democratic primary general treasurer debate. I'm Bill Bartholomew. We're here with Stefan Pryor, the former Commerce Secretary of Rhode Island. His opponent in the Democratic primary, James Diossa, the former mayor of Central Falls, did not show up today, so we are unable to gain his perspective here for all of you. And we do have a sign with his name handwritten on it. Perhaps he'll come crashing through the window like the Kool-Aid man here in the last couple of seconds. But very quickly here, do you endorse anybody for governor?
I don't, Bill, because I'm staying focused on my race. I really want to put all of my energy into figuring out how to keep our economy strong and how to keep our finances stable. So I'm not going to get into anyone else's races. And frankly, I'm also focused on winning this race for treasurer. I think it's enormously important. It's never been more important because of the state of our economy, because there's such uncertainty with inflation up and the stock market down. And quite frankly, I really do believe that my candidacy is far better than the other that is represented in this race. I'm the only candidate who has managed billions of dollars of investment. I've done so responsibly, and in the case of the World Trade Center, we rebuilt that key center in Lower Manhattan, that key center for the world, and helped to manage first the after effects of the Great Recession starting 8 years ago here in Rhode Island. I've been Commerce Secretary. I was Commerce Secretary for 7.5 years. We helped get out of the Great Recession with one of the biggest drops in unemployment in the country. We helped emerge from COVID with strength, one of the strongest recoveries in the country. And I'm mentioning all of this because my opponent has none of that experience, has not managed billions of dollars, has not had these very responsible, sizable public jobs. And I really am passionate about getting into the job of treasurer and making it happen for Rhode Islanders.
Last question here before we do a brief closing statement. Is there a part of Rhode Island's small, let's be honest about it, but is there a part of the state of Rhode Island that you haven't visited, you haven't explored, either in the capacity as, somebody who's seeking office or as Commerce Secretary, or just somebody who says, hey, that seems interesting? And what is that place if it exists?
I visited almost everywhere, to be honest with you. I've been all over the state. I will say this, though. I have been to Block Island like many Rhode Islanders who don't live at Block Island. I've been to Block Island like for a long weekend or for a fun visit. I would like to spend more time on Block Island with everyday Block Islanders. Yeah. And I'm planning to do that, actually. I'm planning to spend some more time there. I've done some of it. I've actually spent time pre-pandemic and during the tough times of the pandemic with small business owners and with residents. So it's not that I've not done it at all. I actually have. But I'd like to experience Block Island a little bit less as a Rhode Island tourist. I'm a Rhode Islander, but as a Rhode Island tourist, and a little bit more understanding the perspective of that valuable island. And listen, we're indebted to Block Island. They are the island that brought us the first ever wind farm in America. So that's something I'd like to do, Bill.
Yeah, just try not to go out there during Reggae Fest.
Oh, my gosh.
That's maybe
I've heard about that.
A time to avoid. All right, so closing statements here. As mentioned, James Diossa is not here, so we will not be able to get a closing statement from him. However, for the last 60 seconds or so, your closing statement, Mr. Pryor.
These are uncertain times, but I also think there's great promise for Rhode Island's economy and for Rhode Island in general. Uncertain times. Why? Because inflation is out of control and because we may be facing a recession. But I do think that Rhode Island, because we have such economic momentum coming out of COVID, one of the strongest recoveries, and because Rhode Islanders have been so resilient, we could lead the way for the Northeast region and even for the nation if there is a recession. We could be the state that demonstrates how to preserve the gains that we've accomplished. We could be the state that figures out, under tough times, new ways to do business, new ways to make investments that bring us out of that tough period even stronger. We could be that state because we've proven it time and again. I know this is a little bit, looking back in a glorifying way, but, goodness gracious, we did bring forward the American Industrial Revolution with Samuel Slater. We are the state that pioneered with offshore wind and brought us into a cleaner energy future. So from early in our existence through to today, we know how to get these things done. I'm optimistic that if we have a treasurer at the helm who's managed through crisis, September 11th, pandemic, and others in between, to be honest with you, Bill, if we have someone who has those kinds of credentials and has the wherewithal to get through, Rhode Islanders have already proven that they can get through. The pandemic was tough here, but Rhode Islanders got through in an exemplary way. Our vaccination rates are high. Our economy is on a relative basis strong, plenty of problems. So I'm optimistic, Bill. What I'm concluding with is the message that I'm optimistic for Rhode Island. I know that if we have the right leadership, including the right treasurer, we can make it through, and we can do so in partnership with business, with labor, with stakeholders across our state, and with everyday Rhode Islanders who always show us the way.
Mr. Pryor, thank you very much, and thank you to all of you listeners out there. I'm Bill Bartholomew. Coming up next week, we will have our debate series continue with the Democratic candidates for governor and mayor of Providence. All of the candidates in each of those respective races have confirmed that they will be attending our debate series. For everyone here at WPRO and Bartholomew Town, I'm Bill Bartholomew. Have a great afternoon.
At HealthSource RI for Employers, we provide access to health insurance to more than 1,100 local businesses and nonprofits, and 96% of them renew through us every year. Maybe it's our choice of 19 different health plans, our 10 years of customizing solutions, or our one local team of dedicated experts helping employers find quality health insurance. See how our numbers stack up for you. Learn more at healthsourceri.com/employers.